Imagine you're an early human and you just got a deep cut from a hunt gone wrong. No hospital, no stitches, no antibiotics, no idea what bacteria even is. Just you, a bleeding wound, and whatever knowledge your group has managed to figure out over generations. So, what actually happened next? Did people just die from every serious injury? Surprisingly, no. And the answer to how they survived is honestly more clever than most people expect. Let's start with the most basic problem, bleeding. Before you can worry about infection or healing, you first have to stop someone from bleeding out. And early humans figured out several ways to do this. Direct pressure was probably the very first method, just pressing something against the wound to slow the blood down, which is still literally the first thing modern first aid teaches today. Beyond that, researchers believe early humans used natural materials as makeshift bandages. Things like moss, certain leaves, and animal fur, which could absorb blood and help a wound start to clot. In some regions, there's evidence that people even used fire, briefly touching a heated stone or blade to a wound to seal it shut, a rough version of what we'd now call cauterization, used mainly as a last resort when bleeding wouldn't stop any other way. And here's something that genuinely surprised scientists. Some of these materials weren't just useful for soaking up blood, they may have actually helped prevent infection too. Certain types of moss, for example, have natural antimicrobial properties. Honey is another big one. It's naturally low in moisture and slightly acidic, which makes it a genuinely hostile environment for many types of bacteria. And there's strong evidence ancient cultures across multiple continents independently used it to pack and cover wounds. Early humans obviously didn't understand germs or bacteria in any scientific sense, but they absolutely could observe outcomes if wrapping a wound in a certain plant or packing it with honey consistently led to better healing and fewer deaths. That knowledge would get remembered, tested again, and eventually passed down. This actually connects to something bigger. Early humans were doing a rough, informal version of trial and error medicine, generation after generation. If a treatment worked, people noticed and they kept doing it. If it didn't work or made things worse, that also got noticed and people avoided it. Over enough centuries, this slowly built up into a surprisingly functional body of medical knowledge, even without anyone understanding the biological reason behind why any of it actually worked. Now let's talk about something even more impressive, broken bones. You'd think a broken leg in prehistoric times would basically be a death sentence, and honestly, without a group to help, it often was. But archaeologists have found skeletal remains showing healed fractures that were properly set, meaning someone in that person's group knew how to realign a broken bone and stabilize it long enough for it to heal correctly. Some evidence even suggests early humans used simple splints made from wood or bark, tied in place with plant fiber or animal sinew, essentially the same basic concept behind a modern cast. And healing a broken bone doesn't happen in a day. It can take weeks or even months, which means, once again, this comes back to something we've talked about before. The injured person had to be fed, protected, and cared for by others the entire time they couldn't fend for themselves, which tells us something important. Treating injuries wasn't just a medical skill, it was deeply tied to social cooperation. A group that abandoned injured members would lose valuable knowledge, hunters, and caregivers. A group that took care of them kept those people alive to contribute again later. There's also strong evidence that certain plants were specifically used as natural painkillers. Willow bark, for example, contains a compound that's chemically related to modern aspirin, and there's evidence that various ancient cultures across the world independently discovered that chewing or brewing it helped with pain and fever. This wasn't some lucky one-time discovery either. It shows up repeatedly across completely unrelated ancient cultures, which strongly suggests people were paying close attention to what actually worked and sharing that knowledge widely. Some researchers have also found evidence of early dental work, and yes, that's exactly as intense as it sounds. Ancient skeletons have been discovered with teeth that show signs of having cavities scraped out and treated, using tools sharp enough to remove decayed material, presumably to relieve pain that would have otherwise been unbearable. There's even one especially famous case of a tooth that appears to have been filled with a kind of early dental filling made from beeswax. There's one more discovery in this area that tends to make people a little uncomfortable, but it's genuinely fascinating: maggot therapy. It sounds disgusting, but maggots actually eat dead and infected tissue while leaving healthy tissue alone, which means a wound crawling with the right kind of maggots can, weirdly, end up cleaner and heal better than one left completely untreated. Multiple traditional cultures across the world independently arrived at some version of this idea, sometimes deliberately allowing it to happen rather than fighting it, because they noticed wounds treated this way tended to heal instead of turning gangrenous. Modern medicine actually still uses a controlled, sterile version of this exact technique today for certain hard-to-heal wounds, which says a lot about how sound the original observation really was. Cleaning wounds mattered too, even without any concept of germs. Early humans seem to have understood at a very practical level that a dirty wound tended to go badly and a cleaned wound tended to go better. Water was an obvious first tool, but there's also evidence that certain plants with natural antiseptic properties, things like garlic, certain tree resins, and specific bitter herbs, were used to rinse or pack wounds. None of this came from a textbook. It came from someone noticing, probably after a painful loss, that the wounds cleaned a certain way didn't turn black and swollen the way untreated ones did. Maybe the most jaw-dropping example of ancient medical skill, though, is trepanation, which is the practice of deliberately cutting or drilling a hole into someone's skull. It sounds terrifying, and honestly it was, but skeletons have been found showing clear signs of bone regrowth around these holes, which means the patient didn't just survive the surgery itself, they lived for months or even years afterward. Some skulls even show evidence of multiple separate trepanation procedures performed on the same person over their lifetime, meaning whoever was doing this had a real, repeatable technique, and their patients kept coming back for more. Nobody knows for certain exactly why early humans performed trepanation, though theories range from relieving pressure after head injuries to treating severe headaches or seizures to more ritual or spiritual explanations. But regardless of the reason, the survival rates alone tell us something important. This wasn't random, careless cutting. It required real anatomical knowledge, steady hands, and almost certainly some understanding of how to keep a wound like that clean enough to avoid a fatal infection. It's worth remembering, too, that these were real people making real decisions under enormous pressure, without any way to look up an answer or ask an expert somewhere else. Every single successful treatment was hard-won knowledge, often paid for with someone else's death before it. So when you put all of this together, a picture starts to form that's very different from the usual stereotype of primitive people just suffering and dying from every injury. Early humans were observant, they experimented carefully, they remembered what worked, and they passed that knowledge down deliberately. It wasn't modern medicine, but it also wasn't nothing. It was medicine built the hard way through thousands of years of watching, testing, and caring for each other. And honestly, that's kind of the whole theme running through basically everything we know about early human survival. It was never really about any single genius discovery. It was about small groups of people paying close attention to their world, remembering what kept people alive, and making sure that knowledge didn't die with them. If you like this, subscribe. I break down stuff like this every week. See you in the next one.